Late at night, the city was quiet. Most people were sleeping. But David Johnson was still awake. He sat alone in his small apartment. The lights were dim. His phone was in his hand, but he was not using it. David looked tired. Not because of work, but because of memories. Years ago, this phone never rang for him. No friends, no classmates, no support. He was the man everyone forgot. David was a black single father. His wife had died many years ago. Life had not been kind to him. He raised his son alone, without help. Back in school days, people laughed at him. They said he was weak. They said he would never become anything. David remembered those days clearly. He remembered walking into school meetings alone. Other parents came in couples. They wore good clothes. They talked loudly. David wore simple clothes. He stayed quiet. He sat in the back. Some classmates looked at him and smiled in a bad way. Some whispered. Some pointed at his old shoes. No one asked how he was. No one asked about his pain. David always lowered his head. Not because he was ashamed, but because he was tired. Tired of explaining his life. Tired of fighting words. Suddenly, the phone in his hand vibrated. David looked at the screen, an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment. He thought of ignoring it. People never called him for good reasons. Still, he answered. "Hello," David said softly. There was laughter on the other side. More than one voice. "David, is this David Johnson?" a man asked. David stayed silent for a second. He knew that voice. It was Mark, one of his old classmates. Mark was loud. Mark was rich. Mark was the same man who once laughed at David in front of others. "Yes, this is David," he replied calmly. "Oh, wow," Mark said with fake surprise. "Long time. Man, we were just talking about you." David felt something heavy in his chest. Talking about him was never a good thing. Mark continued, "We are planning a school reunion. Big one, luxury place." David listened quietly. Mark laughed again. "You should come too. Old friends, you know." David looked at the wall. Small photo frame was hanging there. It was his son's picture. He took a deep breath. "Why now?" David asked slowly. There was a pause. Then another voice joined the call. "Come on, David," the voice said. "It will be fun. Don't worry, no pressure." David knew that voice too. It was Jason. Jason was the one who once said, "You don't belong with us." David's heart beat faster, not from fear, but from old pain. He remembered standing alone at school events. He remembered the jokes, the names, the looks. Mark spoke. "Again, we just want everyone together. Don't overthink." David smiled softly. A smile no one could see. They thought he was still the same man. Poor, broken, weak, they did not know what life had taught him. David stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were bright. Once he had nothing. No money. No respect. But he worked silently. He failed many times. He stood up every time. He built his life step by step. For his son. For himself. Still, he never showed it. On the phone, Mark said jokingly, "Don't worry, David. You don't need to bring gifts or anything." The others laughed. David closed his eyes. This was not an invitation. This was a mockery. But David did not get angry. He had learned something important in life. Silence is power. After a few seconds, David spoke. "I will come," he said. The laughter stopped. "Really?" Mark asked, surprised. "Yes," David replied calmly. "I will come." The call ended soon after. They were happy. They thought their joke would work. David slowly put the phone down. The room was quiet again. He looked at his reflection in the window, a calm face. strong eyes. This time, he was not going as a weak man. He was going as a man who survived. A man who built his future in silence. David picked up the photo of his son. "I'll be back soon," he whispered. Outside, the night was still. Something had started. The reunion was coming, and with it, a truth that would shock everyone. Next morning, David woke up before sunrise. The room was silent. Only the sound of the clock filled the air. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his hands. These hands had worked for years. They'd carried pain, fear, and hope. The phone call from last night stayed in his mind. Not the words, not the laughter, but the feeling. David walked into the kitchen. He made simple coffee. No sugar. No rush. As he sat down, memories returned slowly. Years ago, David was not a man of silence. He was once full of dreams. In school, he tried to speak. He tried to smile. He tried to fit in, but people never listened. When his wife passed away, everything changed. He became both father and mother. He worked small jobs. He studied at night at school meetings. Teachers talked to other parents first. David always waited. Some classmates looked through him, like he did not exist. One day, during a school event, someone laughed and said, "Single dad life must be hard." Everyone heard. No one stopped it. David took his son's hand and left early. That night, his son asked, "Dad, why don't they like us?" David had no answer. That question stayed with him for years. Now, standing in his kitchen, David closed his eyes. The pain was still there. But it was quieter. He was not broken anymore. David walked into his small room. Inside a drawer, there were old notebooks. Pages were yellow. Edges were torn. These notebooks were full of ideas, business plans, numbers, dreams tapped. People laughed when he talked about them. They said, "Focus on surviving first." David did both. He survived, and he built. He touched the notebooks and smiled softly. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message. A reunion group had been created. Names appeared on the screen. Mark, Jason, others. They shared old photos. Old jokes. David was not in those photos. He never was. Someone typed, "Remember how poor David was?" Laugh emojis followed. David read the message. He did not reply. Not because he was afraid, but because he was done proving himself. He locked the phone and placed it face down. David got dressed and stepped. Outside, the morning air was cool. The city was waking up. He walked past tall buildings. People rushed to work. No one noticed him, just like before. But this time, it felt different. David entered a large office building. The guard smiled and opened the door. "Good morning, sir." David nodded. Inside, people waited for him. Meetings, decisions, big numbers. They called him Mr. Johnson. But at night, to the world, he was still poor David. And he liked it that way. Later that evening, David sat alone again. He looked at the reunion date. 1 week left. He thought about going. He thought about not going, but deep inside, he knew why he must go. Not for revenge. Not to show money, but to close an old chapter. David whispered to himself, "Some wounds need light." Outside, the sun slowly went down. The shadows of the past were still there, but this time they followed him. They did not control him, and very soon, the people who laughed would face the truth they never expected. The day of the reunion finally arrived. The sky was clear. The city looked bright. But inside David's heart, old feelings moved again. He stood in front of his mirror, not to admire himself, but to remind himself who he was. He wore simple clothes, clean, plain, no watch, no jewelry. He could have worn more, but he chose not to. In the other room, his son watched him quietly. "Dad, where are you going?" a boy asked. David knelt down and smiled. "I am meeting old people from school," he said. His son looked confused. "Were they kind to you?" David paused. He thought of many answers, but he chose the honest one. "Not always," he said softly. The boy held David's hand. "Then why go?" David looked into his son's eyes. "Because sometimes," he said, "we go back to move forward." His son nodded, even if he did not fully understand. David left the apartment. Outside, a black car waited. The driver stepped out. "Sir, we are ready." David looked around. People passed by. No one paid attention. "Park." "A little far," David said calmly. The driver nodded. David walked the rest of the way. The reunion was held in a big hotel. Tall doors. Bright lights. Laughter came from inside. David stopped for a moment, not from fear, from memory. He remembered walking into rooms like this before. Always invisible. He took a deep breath and entered. Inside, people were talking loudly. Glasses clinked. Music played softly. Old classmates stood in groups. They wore expensive clothes. Big smiles. Mark noticed him first. Mark's smile changed. "Well, well," Mark said loudly. "Look who came." Some people turned around. Whispers started. "Is that David? Wow, he actually came." David nodded politely. Jason stepped closer. "Long time," Jason said, looking at David's clothes. "Still simple, huh?" David smiled. "Yes," he said. "Simple works for me." They laughed. Someone offered him a cheap seat near the back. David accepted as he sat down. Memories hit him again. Same looks, same tone. Nothing changed. A waiter came. "Water." The waiter asked. David nodded. Others ordered wine, expensive drinks. They talked about money, cars, houses. David listened silently. Mark raised his glass. "To success," he said loudly, "and to those who survived." People laughed again. Mark looked at David. David lifted his glass of water calmly. No anger. No shame, just patience. Across the room, a man in a suit watched David closely. The man whispered to another staff member, "Yes, that's him." David did not notice. The music got louder. Lights dimmed slightly. The host walked onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host said, "thank you for coming tonight." Applause filled the room. The host smiled. "Tonight is special," he continued, "because this event exists thanks to one person." David felt nothing yet. The host paused. Suspense filled the air. Before dinner, the host said, "We will introduce our special guest." Mark leaned toward Jason. "I hope it's someone important." He joked. The host looked down at his card. "Please welcome," he said slowly, "our main sponsor." David slowly looked up. The room grew quiet. Something was about to change. The room became very quiet. All eyes moved to the stage. The host held the microphone firmly. He looked serious, like something important was about to happen. David sat still in his chair. He did not move. He did not smile around him. People waited with excitement. Mark leaned back and crossed his arms. "Must be some rich guy," he whispered. Jason nodded. "Yeah, someone big." They did not even look at David. The host cleared his throat. "This sponsor," he said slowly, "helped us book this hotel." Murmurs filled the room. "He also paid for the food," the host continued, "the music, and everything you see tonight." People clapped. David lowered his eyes. Memories returned again. He remembered times when people talked about money in front of him. They always did it louder when he was near. Mark raised his voice. "Who is this hero?" he joked. Laughter followed. The host smiled politely but did not answer yet. "He is not someone who likes attention," the host said. "He is a quiet man." David's fingers tightened slightly. "Quiet?" Jason laughed. "Must be shy." Host continued. "He believes success does not need noise." The room grew calm again. Some people looked around. David slowly raised his head. The host took a short pause. Then he said, "He also once studied in this very school." That sentence changed everything. Whispers started again. "From our school? Who could it be?" Mark sat straight. "There were many rich kids," Mark said confidently. Jason nodded. "Yeah, definitely not everyone." They both smiled. David stayed silent. The host looked toward the crowd. "This man knows what pain is," he said. "He knows what it means to be ignored." David's chest felt heavy. "He knows what it means to be judged." The host continued, without anyone asking his story. The laughter stopped. Some faces changed. David felt the weight of every word. Mark frowned slightly. "What kind of speech is this?" he whispered. The host raised his hand gently. "He came tonight," the host said, "not to show power." The lights dimmed more, but to remind us of respect. A strange silence filled the room. David's heartbeat slowed. The host looked down once more at the card. Then he smiled. "Before I call his name," the host said, "let me say this." People leaned forward. He built his life from nothing. David's jaw tightened. He failed many times. The room was still, but he never stopped. Mark laughed nervously. Okay, bring him out already." Jason nodded. The host lifted his eyes and looked straight ahead. "This man is the reason tonight exists," he said. David felt something shift inside. The host pointed gently toward the audience. "He is sitting among you," he said. People turned their heads. Eyes searched the room. Mark looked left. Jason looked right. Someone stood up in excitement, then sat back down. Whispers became louder. "Who? Where?" The host waited. The silence stretched. David slowly took a deep breath. The room held it. The storm was coming. The silence felt heavy. People looked around the hall. Every face was tense. The host held the microphone close. "He is sitting among you." The host repeated slowly. Mark laughed again, but his voice was not strong this time. "Stop the drama," he said. Jason leaned forward. "Just say the name." The host nodded. He looked down at the card one last time. Then he spoke clearly. "Please stand up," he said. "Mr. David Johnson." For 1 second, nothing happened. Then David slowly placed his glass on the table. The sound was soft, but in the quiet room, it felt loud. David stood up. The room froze. Eyes opened wide. Mouths stayed open. Mark's smile disappeared. Jason's face turned pale. "David," someone whispered. "No, not him." Another voice said. David stood straight. Calm, silent. The host smiled warmly. "Yes," he said. "The same David Johnson." People looked at David again, this time with fear. With shame, the host continued. "He is the founder of multiple companies." A screen behind the stage turned on. Logos appeared. Buildings, numbers. "His net worth is over $100 million," the host said. Gasps filled the room. Mark dropped his glass. It broke on the floor. Jason swallowed hard. The man they mocked. The man they laughed at. He owned everything around them. David walked slowly toward the stage. No rush. No pride. Each step felt heavy. The host stepped aside. David took the microphone. He looked at the crowd. Faces he knew. Faces that once hurt him. He spoke softly. "I did not come here to surprise anyone," David said. The room stayed silent. came because I was invited." He continued. Mark lowered his head. Jason could not meet David's eyes. David paused. "I remember the school," he said. "I remember being ignored." No one moved. "I remember being laughed at," David continued. "I remember leaving events early." Some people looked down. David took a breath. "I was never poor in dreams," he said. "I was just busy surviving." Tears filled some eyes. "I built my life quietly," David said, "because noise was never my strength." He looked at Mark, then at Jason. "But respect," David said calmly, "should never depend on money." He handed the microphone back. David stepped away from the stage. No, applause came at first. Then one person clapped, then another. Soon, the room filled with slow, heavy applause. Not for money, but for truth. The applause slowly faded. The room felt different now, heavy, quiet. People did not know what to say. Mark sat frozen in his chair. His hands trembled, all the jokes he made, all the laughs. They came back to him at once. Jason stared at the floor. He wished he could disappear. The chairs, the walls. Everything felt smaller. David walked back to his seat. No one blocked his way. No. One laughed now. A waiter passed by and stopped. "Sir," the waiter said with respect, "would you like anything?" David shook his head gently. "I am fine," he replied. Across the room, small groups formed. But no one talked loudly. Some people whispered. He was always quiet. We never asked why. A woman wiped her eyes. "I judged him," she said softly. "I feel ashamed." Mark finally stood up. His legs felt weak. He walked slowly toward David. Every step felt like a weight. When he reached David, he stopped. "David," Mark said. David looked up calmly. "I am sorry," Mark said. "I was wrong." The room watched. "I laughed at you," Mark continued. "I thought I was better." David listened. Jason joined them. "I treated you badly," Jason said quietly. "I thought silence meant weakness." David stood up. Not angry, not proud, just honest. "I understand," David said. "Life teaches late sometimes." Eyes filled with tears. "I did not know your story," he said. David nodded. "That was the problem," he replied. No one asked. Silence followed. Then David reached into his pocket. He took out his phone. "I should go," he said. The host stepped forward. "Please stay," the host said kindly. David smiled softly. "My work is done," he said. He looked around the room one last time. "Remember this," David said. "Kindness costs nothing." He turned and walked toward the exit. People stood up. They watched him leave, not as the poor man they mocked, but as the man they misunderstood. Outside, the night air felt light. David took a deep breath. Behind him, the doors closed, and with them, an old chapter of his life. David stepped outside the hotel. The noise stayed behind him. The night was calm. Cool air touched his face. For a moment, he stood still, not to feel proud, but to feel free. He did not look back. Some victories do not need eyes. His phone buzzed, a message from his son. "Dad, are you okay?" David smiled. "I am fine," he replied. "I am coming home." The car arrived slowly. David sat inside and looked out the window. City lights passed by once. These lights scared him. They reminded him of how small he felt. Tonight, they felt peaceful at home. His son waited at the door. He ran and hugged David tightly. "You are back early," the boy said. David knelt and hugged him back. "Yes," he said softly. "I finished what I needed to do." They sat together on the couch. The room was simple. "Quiet, Dad," the boy asked. "Did they respect you?" David thought for a moment. They learned. He said. The boy smiled. I always respected you, he said. David's eyes filled with tears. He held his son close. This was success. Not money, not power, but peace. The next morning, David walked through the city again. People passed him. Some knew who he was. Most did not, and that was okay. In another part of the city, Mark sat alone, Jason too. They scrolled through old messages. Old jokes, none of them felt funny now. They learned a lesson they would never forget that day. David returned to his work. Meetings, decisions, but his heart was light. The past no longer followed him. It stayed behind. That night, David stood by the window again, the same place as before, but not the same man. He whispered softly, "Thank you." Not to the world, but to the pain that made him strong.